Welcome to the Unstuck and Unstoppable podcast, where we help you move your life forward. Look, if you've ever felt like you've been sabotaging your own life but don't know why, then you're listening to the right episode of our podcast today. I'm your host, Jimnkyles. I'm here with Jolea Garza.
Hello, hello.
Hey, JoJo.
Yeah, I'm excited. Some self-sabotage. We're going to talk about it and talk about why. Yeah. Praise God.
That's right. Come on. Well, this is part 2.
Yeah.
So if you're joining us today, last week we had a great podcast. We talked about the power of the subconscious paradigm.
Yeah, it was really great. You tell a great story about fishing with Johnny. And so if you didn't listen to that podcast, go back, listen to that one first, and then come back and listen to this one. We're going to really just help continue to uncover and unpack paradigms.
Well, isn't it interesting how that in life we can find ourselves in what seems like the same situation, but different situation. If that makes sense, it's like maybe
same story, different day, same story, different people. Yeah.
But it's this cycle that you can't seem to break. And it's whether it's jumping from relationship to relationship, maybe it's finances.
Right.
You know, hey, every time we get this far, we almost get debt free, but we find ourselves back in debt.
Right.
Maybe it's a relationship. You jump from one relationship to the next relationship to the next one. And the excuse can ultimately be, well, they're not good enough for me.
Right.
My standards are high. And I'm not saying any of that is not true, but sometimes we got to step back and say, well, is there something that is sabotaging you? Maybe there's a fear of commitment.
Right.
I only go this far and then we stop.
Right.
Because there's something that is sabotaging a real authentic relationship. Because if you're looking for something perfect, there's nothing perfect.
Right. And I always just say at some point we have to stop saying, hey, it's everybody else.
That's
and
right.
Maybe look on the inside and see if there's something on the inside that's
So
either
good.
stuck or broken with us.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing that we know. If you're a victim, if you always say it's everybody else, my pastor and mentor had taught me a long time ago. He just said, listen, if I take responsibility, I can change it.
Yeah, that's so good.
And so you just say, hey, I'd take responsibility. Is there something I can change, something I can do? And hopefully what we're going to help you do is uncover, there might have been something sabotaging you.
Right.
Something from the past that you were unaware of that has come in to try to sabotage your life. And now we're actually going to get a leverage on it. We're going to identify, hey, here's what it might be. I actually tell a story about fishing with Johnny.
Yeah, I thought it was really good because really what you're saying is, hey, here at 44, 45 years old, you had this experience where you could not trust God to come through for you. And it had nothing to do with that specific situation. And all had to do with a story of when you were 15 years
30
old.
years
30
earlier.
years ago. And how that impacted your relationship, your trust in God 30 years later.
Absolutely. And as a pastor. And so for those of you that are listening, I'm a pastor. And not only am I a pastor, I'm a business entrepreneur. I've got real estate and wrote a book. But at the end of the day, you would think, man, that pastor should have it all together. Well, I didn't, and I still don't.
Right.
And the Lord really took me on a journey. It's really part of what the book that gets released in November.
Yeah, November 8th.
November 8th. We're so excited. You want to go get a pre-release copy, go to the website. You can get a pre-release copy or order it, a pre-sale of it.
Yeah.
But it's what took me on this journey of getting unstuck and becoming unstoppable.
Right.
Because I just realized if this is something that I'm dealing with, there's probably a lot of people that are dealing with it as well. And studies have found that that's true.
Yeah.
We did a study, and research shows that 80% of Americans today feel stuck.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people not only feel stuck, but they don't know why. And so I love the content in your book. I love everything that comes out of it and talking about how to get unstuck. But you can't really even start the journey without this. And this is what you talk about a lot in the book are the paradigms. So this is so pivotal
100%.
In this journey.
Well, for those of you that don't know or you didn't listen to last week, first off, go back and listen to part 1 last week. But I'm going to go ahead and say it again. There was a study done by the National Science Foundation, and it found that the average person has about 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts in a day. Think about that, 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts in a day.
I'm on the 60,000 thought time.
I'm
trying to read books and my mind is just racing. Yeah.
And then of those thoughts, here's what the study found. 80% of them were negative.
Wow.
And 95% of them were the same repetitive thoughts as the day before. So 80% of what they're thinking is negative. 95% are repetitive. And we wonder why we find ourselves in this stuck mentality
Wow.
and mode, and where we're in a rut in life and we can't seem to break out. And so we began to talk about how a subconscious paradigm, which is something that is unseen, your subconscious paradigm is the unseen programming that runs in the background of your mind.
Right.
So it's not like you can see it, but it's subconsciously every decision, every moment, it's all
It's
running.
driven
Well,
out of that.
It's the habitual.
Right.
Did you know up to 95% of your life, what you do is habitual? In other words, it's without thinking. It's a habit, and it's done by your subconscious paradigm. Think about this. How many times do you drive to work and
Right.
you don't even remember how you got to
Too
work?
many times to say I would rather not.
Yeah,
It's not safe.
Oh my God, you're thinking, oh Lord, how did I get there? Well, because you've gone to work the same way
Right.
every single day. At some point, your mind just kind of shuts down, and you start thinking about the problems, the fight. You start thinking about the future, the plans, whatever it is.
We talk about autopilot. You
Autopilot.
go on autopilot. I think a lot of times paradigms and the subconscious thoughts that we have just put us on autopilot in a lot of different areas of our lives. We do the same thing over and over again
Yes.
because that's what we've always done. That's what
Yes.
we've always thought. And
Yeah.
that's how we live.
Autopilot. Well,
Yeah.
there was one study that I read. They surveyed 3,000 people. Up to 90% of people live on autopilot. They would confess, hey, my life is mostly ran on just day in and day out, mundane,
Do the same
same thing.
Yeah.
Don't even think about it. No new, fresh anything.
Yeah.
And so the subconscious paradigm is something that we've got to evaluate, especially if we're feeling stuck.
Right.
Like, what is it that's causing? And here's what I know: being stuck many times is not from external factors; it's internal.
Right.
Like a circumstance, a situation, a person cannot cause me to get stuck.
Right.
I may have some adversity. I may have some moments where it
Some
doesn't look like I've got
experiences, yeah.
forward progress on the external, but really being stuck is something that happens from within. And so we've got to address that and really make sure that we are working hard to move our life forward and addressing the things that we wouldn't normally address.
Yeah. And so, today I know we want to talk about just a couple of ways that these are formed. Yes, or the last time we recorded, we talked about what paradigms are, and you
Yep.
told a great story of how they're established. So now we're going to go back and look at where they come from. How do I even know what paradigms maybe I'm carrying and what I've been living through? So I'm excited to go a little bit deeper into that.
Well, and when we study out paradigms, there's really two ways that we have a paradigm created and formed in our subconscious. They're really built over the lifetime by the environment that we grew up in. And so, in other words, the people we were raised
Wow.
with, people we were around as a child, but then also through your life experiences.
Wow.
So the first one, environmental conditioning, this is one of the primary ways that we have the subconscious paradigms that we live with today, is that you show me your family and I'll show you what are some of the subconscious paradigms. So let me give you a case in point.
Yeah.
So if you were raised in a family that loves Ford trucks, what do you think you're going to drive?
You're going to drive a Ford.
That's right. If you were in a family that voted Democrat,
Right. You're
what do
going to
you-
vote Democrat.
You're going to vote Democrat.
That's easy. Yeah.
Your family that voted Republican, what are you going to vote?
You're going to vote Republican.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's not even something that you have to think twice about,
Right.
because as you were growing up, your parents, your grandparents, brother, sibling, somebody said things like, oh, those Republicans, or oh, those Democrats, or,
Yeah.
I'll never forget, I was a teenager. And it's a funny story of why I drive a Ford truck today.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize it until I started to write this book and really go through some of the paradigms that I have in life. But I was working as a teenager for a guy who owned a lawn company. And I'll never forget, we're driving, going to cut some grass, and he drives a Ford truck. And it was
Okay.
a nice truck. I loved it. Well, a Chevy truck was driving by, and I'll never forget, I said, man, it was a brand new
Yeah,
Chevy.
you're like, that's a
I mean,
good
it was
looking truck.
good-looking truck.
Yeah.
And he said, what? And he looked at me crazy. He said, Jimbo, that ain't no truck. It actually had WT on the backside. It stood for work truck. He said, any truck that has to have work truck on it, that ain't no truck at all. Chevys ain't no truck. This
That's
Ford
so
is a truck.
funny.
And it is so funny
Yeah.
how subconsciously I've bought 2 Ford trucks.
Yep.
And as I went back to evaluate it, I don't know, Chevy and Ford, I mean, I know there's a rivalry, but they both do the same thing. But that is why I drive a Ford. I hear
Locked
Joe
in.
Cato's words in my heart. And as a teenager, I believed Joe. Why? Because he was a successful adult.
In your life.
He had influence.
Yeah. And I think about even, for me growing up, so, two different examples. My parents always said they picked family values, and I always encourage people to have family values, but ours were 3. It was God, family, education.
Yeah.
To this day, I still live by those values. My parents were influential in my life, of course. And so that's how I live. And that was a great environmental conditioning to put focus on God, our family, and our education. And then I think about one parent in particular. I won't even tell you which parent, but one parent has a hankering for the nice and finer things in life. And so, of course,
bougie.
whenever, just a little bit bougie. So whenever I'm going shopping with my husband, who is a lot more low maintenance than I, or looking for a hotel or doing anything like that, I'm like, it has to be 5-star.
He's like, no, that's got a bed.
No, it's got to be
shower.
Shiny. Like there's just the conditioning of that's just how I grew up.
That's how I grew up.
I like the nice things.
I ain't lowering my standard.
But it's just because that's what I saw from one of my parents.
That's
and so it was an environmental conditioning that set a paradigm in my life for everything having to be, the very best, or maybe even a little excessive.
That's right. Well, even in what, maybe you're listening now and you can relate, but I was in one of my talks, I actually show an example of this. Remember that talk where I have a really sweet puppy?
Yeah.
And so I show it up on the screen, and this is the fluffy,
cute
cutest
little puppy. Yeah.
And everybody goes, oh. And then I stop everybody and say, yeah, but that's not everybody's reaction.
Right.
Because there are a few people that are sitting out here in the audience that have had a bad experience with a dog.
They're
cringing.
Yes.
When they threw the puppy up on the screen, their blood pressure rose, their heart rate rose. Because as a child, maybe they were attacked by a dog.
Wow.
Something bad happened with the dog.
Yeah.
And so what happened to them in that moment, is that puppy on the screen a threat? No. They went back to that moment as a child where they were bitten, maybe scuffed up, whatever it was with that animal, and that immediate response is brought
Changed their
forward.
entire reaction.
That's right.
Their entire perception was impacted.
So maybe
by
that's
that
you
moment.
listening. You see a dog, you actually cross the road on the other side. No matter how small, because there's something inside and you don't even realize it.
Wow.
But it's because of a subconscious paradigm. It's something that happened to you as a child. And then once that dog attacked you, you're like, all dogs will attack you.
Right.
Well, that's a lie. Not all dogs do. But you believe the lie. And because you believe it, now it becomes a part of your paradigm. And once it's a part of your subconscious paradigm, now it's the filter that helps you make decisions.
Right.
And so everything you do is under that filter. You avoid dogs. Maybe it's cats.
Right.
My grandfather passed away a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking to Granny. We took her out, and she's healthy. Thank God for that.
Yeah.
And anyway, we were talking, and she said, Jim, I am deathly afraid of cats. Now, I've never known that. My granny's 84 years old.
Right.
And I'm like, Granny, you're afraid of cats? She said, yeah, as a child, she was going up the steps to her mom, and a cat jumped on her back and dug the claws down her back as a child and scratched her all the way down. And she said, I am deathly afraid of cats. Well, in her mind, she's like, all cats will claw you.
Yeah.
She believed it, and then now that's been part of her filter. So
Yeah.
no matter what it is, it's
the
thought that
conditioning.
is put
Yeah.
into your mind, whether you thought it or whether someone else put that thought in your mind.
Also, I just think, one more great example would just be for anybody who's ever lived or grew up maybe in scarcity. So I talked about, liking the nicer things, but maybe you grew up in an environment where it was always maybe paycheck to paycheck, or you're struggling for a next meal, or not really sure. Or maybe you saw that and saw a struggle. Then your whole environment, your whole life might be defined by that scarcity.
We never have enough.
Mentality. Yeah.
We'll always run out.
Yeah, gotta hoard everything.
Gotta hoard everything.
Yeah.
Gotta hold on to everything.
Yeah.
So then that becomes your filter, and instead of what you seeing being more than enough, it's never enough.
Yep.
And so now even you find yourself, I'm thinking of, the husband right now who continues to try to climb the ladder, not because that's where he wants, but because what he has is not enough.
Wow.
And so that subconscious paradigm, I'm not saying don't climb the ladder of success, but let's don't climb it because we're walking through an experience that we never dealt with as a child. So that when I get there, here's the challenge is if you're doing it because you're sabotaging yourself through a paradigm that's negative, that's wrong, when you get there, it's never going to satisfy you.
Enough.
It's not going to get you where you thought it was going to be. It's going to end up being the ruin of your life, not the goal or the success of your life.
Wow. That's so good.
Well, and then the second thing is the heightened emotional experiences. Yep. So the first one is your environmental conditioning. So many of us, we all have things in our life that are part of our subconscious paradigm based on how we grew up, the environment we grew up in. But now it's a heightened emotional experience.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example of something that happened when I was 12 years old. When I was 12 years old, we played Little League, me and my twin brother, Steve, and we were pretty good. I was pitcher, first baseman. Steve was catcher. I batted fourth, which those who don't play baseball is clean up.
Clean up, come on.
Yeah.
Get them all through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have people on base. I'm batting. And my dad said he would come to a game. So I'm looking around. Dad, is he here? Well, he was in restaurants my whole life.
Right.
And so he said, I'm going to make it there, son. I promise you. This was like the game he was going to make. And I felt like I'm about to rock this ball out of the park. And I'm looking for him.
This is my moment. Yeah.
This is my moment. And I don't see him. I'm like, that's okay. Dad's out there somewhere.
Right.
Well, lo and behold, of course, I hit a home run, round the bases.
Yeah.
I look out into the stands. Dad is still not there.
Wow.
I get into the dugout. Hey, where's Dad? Dad never made it. He never made it to the game.
Wow.
And in that moment, in that game, I had two experiences and really some emotional feelings to it. Number one, I'm a champion.
Yeah.
So
you're a winner.
I'm a winner.
You're good at baseball.
I'm good at baseball.
Yeah.
I'm a good athlete.
Wow.
And man, I've always my whole life just felt like I'm a good athlete. You put me anywhere. I could play football, baseball, basketball. I got it. It was in that moment.
Right.
The second thing is you're not worth your dad showing up. So you really have no intrinsic value.
Wow.
And so there was a real insecurity brought inside of my life that, man, if my dad doesn't show up for my life, then nobody really loves me or cares about me, which is so crazy because it's the most opposite thing from the truth.
Right.
But in that moment, there were such extreme emotional experiences that my whole life, it wasn't until I got into counseling about 8 years ago, realizing that I pushed people away because I felt like they were going to leave anyway.
Wow.
I'm not valuable enough for them to stay, to be a part of my life. And so I found myself subconsciously sabotaging relationships by pushing people away. And Phyllis and I, when we first got married, we've been married 22 years. In our first couple of years, we had to deal with this.
Right.
And I'll never forget having the epiphany back then that, oh, well, if my dad left, you'll leave.
Wow.
And we had a rocky first couple of years. You know our story. And part of that was because of this subconscious paradigm that was sabotaging this relationship with the woman that I would spend the rest of my life with.
Wow. I think the heightened emotional experiences are so pivotal. You really have to look back in some of the big moments. We always talk about big days and bad days. And it's so important to just go back and evaluate those. You know, I even think about not even a personal, but I help lead, you know, here at Anchor Bend and at your church and, you know, help oversee some of the staff. And I was in a conversation with somebody and noticed that they're, just so you know, they're tech geniuses. They're great at technology and really great at doing all of the things. And so, you know, we're sitting in a meeting and they were talking about how, you know, they're like, I'm not a reader. And remember a couple podcasts ago, we always talked about the always and never statements that leave us stuck. And so they're like, I'm not a reader. I've never been a good reader. And I'm like, where does that come from? You're a smart person. And so we prayed and then I said, now let's talk about your childhood. Let's go all the way back. Where in your life were you told that you weren't a good reader?
Right.
And he began to share. He just said, well, you know, when I was in the first grade, and first grade is where my kid just learned to read. So he's like, I was in the first grade and I wasn't catching on. By the end of the year, I hadn't, you know, been reading at the level I was supposed to. So they tested me for special ed classes and never tested into the special ed classes, but that's how far behind he felt. And I told him that was the moment.
That was the moment.
That's the moment. That was the heightened emotional experience that all throughout his life, he's lived off of the lie that was told to him in the first grade, 6 or 7 years old.
First grade.
Yeah.
How many people are listening right now and they're impacted in the same way?
Right. So I just wonder how many of us have had those heightened emotional experiences at a young age. Maybe a parent got sick. Maybe you didn't do well in elementary school. Maybe you had an experience with a sibling.
Coach.
Yeah, a coach that
coach said something. Then you're not. I'll never forget that they used to always love to make me and Steve race, and they told Steve, "You're not good. Your brother always beat you." And he just finally quit. He went into music, and I stayed in sports. And I go back to that coach that I remember spoke words that I feel like really cause Steve to not want to pursue what he's already good at.
Yeah, and I do even think about people who have maybe been abused, maybe verbally, physically, though that all contributes to the paradigms that we have in our lives. Or
neglected.
Yep.
You know, nowadays it's like maybe you weren't abused, but you were neglected. Nobody was around, so you were left to yourself.
Yeah.
So when something bad happened, see, that's what's not fair.
Right.
Right. As a kid, you don't know to fight those thoughts.
We're vulnerable.
You're vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so these thoughts just flood your mind. That's why it's so important who you hang out with, what you're around, who you're around, the environments. But as an adult, you know better. You're like, I know better. Man, I'm strong. I'm bold. But the problem is, you've already got some of these paradigms that are sabotaging your life. And though you know the truth, you don't believe the truth.
Yeah.
And I want to help you right now as we bring this to a close. Okay, you're out there, you're saying, okay, we've been listening to paradigms. What is it that I do? How can I move forward? Here's what I would say. Here's your homework. First thing is identify the problem.
Right.
So you've got to ask probing questions. When's the first time? So find an area. Maybe you find yourself running from relationship to relationship, whether it's friends or romantic, doesn't matter. And you find this one area. Go back to, why did you go from this relationship to the other? Well, I felt betrayed.
Right.
Okay. So here's what you would do now is, when was the first time in your life that you remember feeling betrayed?
Wow.
When's the first time? See, your subconscious, what's very interesting about the subconscious is it's not done in chronos time.
Right.
So we would think, well, I'm an adult now. Yeah, but when something subconsciously comes up.
It never just goes away.
Well, when you're 6 years old, that's how come someone can go from 0 to 10 in a moment.
It's triggered. They call it being triggered.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the trigger causes them to go from 0 to... What just happened was that 6-year-old stepped into this 45-year-old's moment.
Wow.
That's why it's not logical. That's why it doesn't make sense. It's irrational, because you subconsciously go back to wherever age you were when you felt that feeling at first, when you haven't dealt with it.
Wow.
So you got to go back to whatever the problem is. When's the first time I felt what it is that I'm feeling that caused me to experience this?
Yeah.
And then you need to do this. You need to take a moment. You need to write everything that comes down to your mind.
Yes. Journal.
Everything. Journal.
Yeah.
Hey, I felt this one. And it's not going to make sense. It's kind of like when I had talked about last week, the whole fishing with Johnny. I kept hearing fishing with Johnny. Just got to go back. It may not make sense. It doesn't matter. You're just not to filter it. Just write it down. And then you need to go through and have someone help you process it.
So good.
So for us, we have a counselor. Randy Powell does an amazing job. Journey Counseling Center in California does fantastic. Been my counselor for a while. Love him. He helps me process. So if you don't have a counselor, find a friend, someone. Hey, listen, this is what happened. This is what it made me feel. The first time I felt it, I was 6 years old. Here's the story. Here's the situation. Help me process it. Yeah, process it. Help me unpack it. And then what you'll find is there are some lies that were planted in your heart. The enemy, we believe the devil's the enemy.
Yeah.
He plants lies in your heart. You're not good enough. No one loves you. Nobody cares about you. You're dumb. We go through a litany.
So many lies.
You'll never be rich. You'll always be poor. And so what you then got to do is identify the one lie. You're not good enough. You're not lovable enough.
Good.
Whatever it is. And then I would encourage you as a believer, I'm a Christian, go and find God's word that refutes the lie and gives me the truth.
So good.
So you'll never be anything. Well, Philippians says I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So you go find the scripture to revert the lie into truth.
Yeah.
And then now you begin to pray it, you meditate on it, you confess it, and then you keep doing it. How long? Until you believe it.
So good.
And there is no easy process. There's no quick fix. There's no fast food or microwave.
Unfortunately, but fortunately, it's worth it. It's so worth it to go back and spend the time doing this.
Well, and I was thinking about you talking about the Wheel of Life a couple of weeks ago, how you can be at a 7 and 8 in your life in every area, and this one area is a 2. Listen, if you're running your life on a flat tire, you will never live the life God's called you to live.
Wow.
So as much work as it takes, as hard as it is, be committed to the real person, the full person that God wants you to be. And we want to help you move your life forward. Well, listen, we're getting to the end of the podcast, but we want to hear your story. We would love to be a part of your journey. Would you hit us up on social media?
Yeah.
We want to know, tell us hey, I was feeling stuck here, But man, because of the podcast, I went back. There's some paradigms.
So
we want to
good.
celebrate with you. We want to go on this journey with you and be a part of what God's doing. We'd love to hear. In fact, you can email us at my story at jimnkyles.com. My story at jimnkyles.com. And we'd love to hear that story. Got a few next steps we want you to take and help you move your life forward. First one, I want you to subscribe. Would you subscribe to the podcast wherever it is that you consume the content?
Yeah.
That way it comes directly into your inbox. It's automatic. We'd love to have you subscribe.
Yeah, we want you to teach. Share this podcast with somebody today. Talk to them about what you learned and just give them some takeaways. We always know that you learn the best when you're able to teach it.
Then we want you to engage. Look, the new knowledge that you learned today, apply it in your life today.
Absolutely.
Don't wait. Don't just teach it. Engage it.
Yeah, and then we want you to join our community, participate. Join us on Facebook. We have a free community there. We'd love to connect with you, hear what you're learning and receiving from this content. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and on YouTube.
Yeah, and then last, we want you to share the podcast. Would you share the podcast with one person? Just right now, as it comes to a conclusion and end, just share it. Say, hey, been listening to this podcast. It's really helped me. We'd love to continue to connect with people and help you move your life forward. Well, we can't wait to be back with you next week. Hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.
See ya.